So I was like, okay, this time I'm just going to do one note card to focus, although I still loved every bit of it.
That's not really fair to people like me who didn't get through it the first time.
Well, we will let you go first so that we don't step on. Hey, y'all, I'm Marnie Stockman. Welcome to this episode of Bits and Books. We are talking about one of my favorites of all time, Reality is Broken, Why Games Make Us Better and How They Can Change the World by Jane McGonigal. I read this 2 years ago and thought it was brilliant, and we decided to read it again for Bits and Books. So thanks for joining us. We're going to have everybody introduce themselves and talk about maybe one thing that they love or disagree with on the book. And I'm going to start with our newest guest today, Scott Johnson. So Scott and his business partner, Andrew, who's off having a baby, well, probably his wife, but still, I think it's fair to say, is they have started Slightly Smarter. And if you don't follow Slightly Smarter or subscribe to their newsletter, you really must if you love books, because every day they will put some more homework for you in your inbox. They actually give a really cool summary of the book, some things to think about. And it's a great way to get the big idea and decide if maybe you want to learn more. So, Scott, would you introduce yourself and tell me something about the book?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great to be here, Marnie. And it's always interesting to hear other people describe Slightly Smarter. I think you did an amazing job
I was like,
there.
did I get that right?
No, it's great. We're still deciding like how do we frame it. We're a couple months in, but we're kind of calling it a micro learning media startup. But the whole goal is to help busy, curious leaders level up every day. So right now it's a daily email. It's short, intended to be able to read or skim within 2 minutes. And the idea is we curate a book a day, put a spotlight on the author, a few of the big ideas, and just give you a taste of the book. We started it because I created a laundry list of all the books I wanted to read, and there was no way I was going to get through them. So it was a way for me to kind of filter through and figure out which ones I want to go deeper on. So
No, I think that's brilliant. And like I said, you're adding to my homework pile. So I'm going to not let that make me anxious. Sometimes I'm just going to get slightly smarter by the books instead of
yeah,
all.
yeah, you don't have to do it all. Just a little bit every day.
Perfect.
Um,
I'm glad you joined us today for sure. Tell me something about the book. What did you think?
I thought the definition of a game was really interesting.
Yeah.
Like they called it playing a game is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And if you kind of break those down, like the voluntary attempt is what I think it said that the hard work that we choose is what makes us happy. And I thought that was really interesting of like a framing on how to think about games. And it also like I kind of went into this thinking that like video games is kind of the context, maybe just
Yeah.
because of the cover and so forth. But it really opened my eyes to like what's the definition of a game? How do we package these up? Um, I know one of the things I talked about golf as an example of a game
Yeah.
and any sport. And
Brilliant.
it's one of those things that like I love playing golf, but it's like a never ending, like
Yeah.
you're competing against yourself. You're getting a
It's an
little bit better
infinite
per
game.
day. And I don't know
Yeah.
why it sucks me in, but it's I think probably because it's a voluntary attempt and there's these unnecessary obstacles that you're trying to overcome.
I'm totally with you. You definitely hit some of the points. As a matter of fact, we're going to come back to that voluntary. That's the first thing I want to talk about when after introductions is the whole notion of voluntary. So I'm going to jump to Marvin B. Marvin, introduce yourself. Tell me something maybe you agree or disagree with the book.
Well, hello, everyone. Marvin B. I run an IT shop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm also host of the IT Business Podcast. And so the book to me, both good and bad things I liked about it, because it did give me a perspective on how to start to understand the workforce now, the people that are coming in, also the same people that I have trouble with when I try to hire them. And it does a good job of talking about, what games provide for people. It provides them with that instant feedback, positive, work, failure, and they can grow from that. Page 38, where it talks about it gives them a sense to do a relentless pursuit of happiness.
Which is, I think, a fantastic like thing to think about.
Yep.
Uh, and and often to your point of with work, like some clash that employees may feel when they don't feel like their job is a relentless pursuit of happiness. Maybe relentless in there, but maybe not the happiness piece.
Well, and that brings the flip side of the coin is they're always looking for happiness. So as soon as they run into a wall and stuff, what I'm finding, and this is the real life side of me, is that a lot of gamers quit if they can't figure it out right away. They won't ask for help. They won't do more exploratory stuff. And, they will, what is it? What the one, here's the thing, the one game, that Portal, when they explain that they walk into the game with no idea of what to do and they can click around and kind of figure it out. And I've dealt with clients that as you're trying to help them with support, they're too busy clicking. And it's like, stop clicking so we can figure out where to go. And then on the other side is that whole thing where if they can't figure it out, they quit. Because they think, well, the answer's not here, so I'm going to go off somewhere else. No. You can't just quit. So that was the frustrating side for me. But understanding the mentality of what games bring, the book did a very good job of explaining that. So I feel a little better.
All right. What the failure point, which I think is a lot of what is the deep part of that, is a topic I want to talk about too. Jim Smith, what say you?
I'm not only the hair club president, but I am also a client. So we got a very.
I should get a ball cap for this show, shouldn't I?
No, I'm Jim Smith. I run Proper Sky Managed IT Services, and we do IT the proper way. So that's our new tagline here, and so I'm going to sell it, Marty.
It's a good one.
So let's see here. What I liked about first off, this book, I cannot believe that the word gamification wasn't used once. Like I was like, this is literally the definition of gamification of every system, right? And I think the book was 2013 is when it came out. So I think what I found interesting is I'm reading another book that's like absolutely dystopian in contrast to this. It talks about sort of smartphones and some other notifications and stuff like that. What I really liked about this book was how optimistic and halcyon I felt the entire subtext of the concepts were.
So 2011, and I think she is the person that came up with the term gamification.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I didn't read it in the book.
I'm not saying it, but I think she is the one that came up with it, but this was published in 2011. So absolutely, it was before that term was bandied about.
Yeah, because she also mentions augmented reality in here, which 2011 was just, that's so far ahead of the curve of what we're seeing today, and it's interesting because there's such a positive bent on how games can improve people's lives. And I think she does an excellent job of going case by case and sort of like, in the context of traditional golf, right? In the context of, she has that, what they call Tombstone Poker piece where she talks about it for a chapter. And then she talks about just Second Life and a couple of the online version games where it's sort of augmented reality. And it's just really good and nice to read something that was so positive and just, I don't know, I enjoyed it.
So my son is a gamer, my daughter's not, and I made both of my children read this. And for sure, I thought, am I going to love or hate this? Because I've certainly had the battles when my son was in high school of like, you do not need to spend this much time on there. So this also gave me a ton of hope in a different way. And I really do encourage. It's one of those books that I feel like everyone in the world should have to read. I'm keeping a list for the entire world. So as soon as somebody lets me publish it and can help me get the word out, I will share the list. So Scott Levy, introduce yourself. Tell us what you think.
Scott Levy, CEO and founder of Result Maps. We help CEOs and leaders get everyone on the same page, engage with the strategy and executing all together beautifully, unicorns, rainbows, all that good stuff. On the book, I was surprised. First of all, I never wanted to read it, but Marnie, you were like the fourth person that had recommended it.
And
I actually read this in May, and then you didn't just recommend it. You're like, oh, this really impacted like how we went to market with our product.
Yeah,
I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. I am sort of a recovering games addict from back in my 20s. I realized that I got way too into them, so I just stopped playing cold. That's 30 years ago for anybody that's a math fan.
Staying along at home.
So So it was interesting for me because my younger son plays, but is much more balanced than I ever was about it. And it gave me a way to think about that a little differently. Number one. Number two, I got a bunch of ideas on what we could do to make our app more fun.
Mhm.
Um, and how to, I think so much of staying with the tough problems, like Marvin was talking about, so much of that is like how you break that down and keep it fun and keep the ball moving, right? That's what I've always liked about whether it's martial arts or music or picking up some skill is like there's always some feeling of aha you get. It keeps you going. And games do that so well. And the fact that she broke it down, like here are the components. Here's how you need to think
Yeah.
about that. That's what I really enjoyed about the book. And there's so many notes I took on it, but that idea and Scott, the other Scott mentioned one of my favorite quotes from it, like games is like actively going after these unnecessary things
Yeah.
for the fun of it and the joy of it. And it's a uniquely human thing. I also didn't expect collaboration to be such a central theme. Like she talked about how collaboration unlocks a lot and how that can be part of the fun thing about games. And so all those things just got my brain going.
So it's interesting you mentioned the collaboration piece because at the same time while I was rereading this, I was listening to Quiet by Susan Cain, which is about introverts. And the IT space, there are a lot of self-proclaimed introverts. But what is interesting is a lot of the introvertedness does not play out in the IT space, especially virtually. People are more willing to collaborate in a different way. So I thought, oh, these ideas are coming together differently than I expected, but they make sense because otherwise what I would have expected in terms of introverted behavior in virtual worlds, I would have been wrong. So that was interesting. Chris Dix.
Hey, yeah, Chris Dix. I am the Director of Conversational Interfaces at Cloud Radio. Formerly of
I always
So
just see a name tag that like, you're
That's
going to have to
okay.
wear an extra large shirt
That's
to
right.
cover that. Yeah.
Yeah, or Tears or something. We're building
Dress.
the best, trying to build the best chat and AI tools for SPs. I really did enjoy the book. I didn't expect to get so much out of it. I mean, I'm someone who grew up playing video games. I'm probably part of the first generations of people that grew up playing a lot of video games. Have kids that play a lot of games, and it made me think about, surprisingly, because it's right there in the title, not so much about what games are doing for you, because I kind of understood that anyway, but more about what's missing from real life.
Why we're escaping to games.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that I thought it was really important how she stressed like the success or failure. Part of it is just the lack of agency that people have in real life. To be able to do something and see your actions take effect in a way that matters is something that people are actively searching for, and that they don't get enough of in real life as it is structured today. And it made me think about that a lot, and how we could try to make a change to do something to give people that sense of agency, that they would apply the same kind of activity and energy and commitment to real activities. So that was my big takeaway.
I think one of the things that surprised me was I really expected to be a lot of words that my son would understand and I would not. Like, all right, how much am I going to hear about World of Warcraft? And there was some in there, right? But then she started with golf and Scrabble and Tetris, right? I'm sure that was for me, so I could play along at home, and got into some of the augmented reality pieces. Again, one of the things is to think about death for 5 minutes a day and you'll be happier, right? And so there are some real world games. The IED or the AED devices, the defibrillators, the game where there's a real world game to help identify where all the defibrillators in the world are. So you can go scam one in and like it becomes the Marnie Stockman defibrillator type of thing. I found it interesting that it wasn't just what I expected, which was about gaming the way I think of it. And believe me, I think of it a lot. My son has me listed in his phone as Spawn Point. So instead of like mom, I am a spawn. Yeah, I know. Kind of funny. The first time I saw it, I was like, I'm, I, hmm. And then I said, I would like, that's actually hilarious. I'm totally fine with being Spawn Point. But could you do me a favor and also put me down as ICE in case of emergency? Because there's not a cop in the world that's going to find you in trouble and think like, let me scroll through here to find Spawn Point. So anyway, so I want to start with Scott Johnson's question around the voluntary piece, because I think that this is part of actually what Chris and Marvin talked about a bit, because they talked about games being, there were 4 requirements for a game. It had to have a goal, it had to have rules, had to have a feedback system, and it had to be voluntary. And I think when we look at the first 3 things, goals, rules, and a feedback system, we see like, oh, we can totally gamify work. And then we see voluntary. And my thinking is another great book, like Start With Why, and why I've always agreed with Simon Sinek's concept, like if they will believe in your why, they'll buy your what. But I believe that businesses need to have a really compelling why and culture so that their employees will buy their what. And what they're buying into is not the product, right? Where I'm going to go buy the product, but buying into wanting to support the product in some way. So Scott, tell me a little more about the voluntary piece, and then I want to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah, it got me thinking like just ways of organizing work. And if you think about all the different jobs to be done, almost allowing people, like putting them out there, letting people self-select and organize into teams to kind of go after and accomplish those jobs was a different framing than kind of laying it out. Here's your tasks and here's what you need to do. At the end of the day, everything still gets done, but people kind of self-select and move towards that. It was just like an interesting reframing for me on one way to make it voluntary.
So being a Marylander, steam crabs is a thing, and people absolutely want the largest steam crab first. And there are 2 types of gatherings. There is you get the first crab in front of you. You're not allowed to weigh it and pick it or anything. Like you just have to take that one. And there's the like, yeah, go get the biggest one you can find. But if you're always grabbing the biggest crab you can eat and always doing the job that you want to do, you've always like, you're always happy because you always got the best one. Now when you're down to the last 3 crabs, they're all the itty bittiest ones, but you're still getting the big, you're like, you still get a win. So sorry, it just, that's what came to mind. Chris Dix, you look like you were thinking about something when,
Well, you got me thinking about crabs. I miss home a little bit because I'm originally from the East. Oh, man, you're killing me with that. Yeah, no, the voluntary aspect of it, yeah, is kind of critical. She dealt a lot with, intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards, and it's like it's not enough. It seems like it should be enough, and it matters to pay people, for things like everybody needs money, everybody needs to have a job, and but I think a lot about providing those intrinsic rewards for whatever it is you're asking them to do as part of their task or job or whatever. It's not easy, but a lot of that is it's part of what we try to do with the product, and is to take the pieces of the job out that are unsatisfying, to automate pieces that are unfulfilling and let people focus on the things that actually do give them those sort of intrinsic rewards. And so, maybe you don't want to have a job, but if your job gives you some sort of opportunity to be creative or inventive or feel like you made a difference, then you do get those intrinsic rewards.
Yeah. I can call on folks because I always feel like with 6 people, it's awkward in Zoom. So Jim.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that really stood out to me was the correlation of agency with self-satisfaction, right? So I think the voluntary component comes with and I wrote this word down on my other notes, but I forget. She kept saying the word, but there's 4 or 5 emotions that come out of playing games. and it was
Like Genesis or something. I know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like some obscure Greek term, and
Yep,
so
yep.
it was interesting to me and I thought about this. One of the things I liked about this book is it re-inspired me to play Civilization 6. I don't know if you guys have ever played Civ 6. It will steal your life. But I looked at it through fresh lenses because I was like, why do I keep clicking on this game? Like, why will I find myself at 3 o'clock in the morning sipping my third bourbon, wondering why I can't beat Spain, right? And it's like I know I should go to bed, but there's just this satisfaction that comes from creating these obstacles or overcoming these fictitious obstacles. Like I just want to get to this next hurdle, and it really, really resonated with me when I was playing that game of just how well and how important that self-selection and agency becomes, I think, for the person playing the game. And I put this in the context of technicians, right? We're MSPs here, right? And I thought the first thing I thought of is like, everybody gamifies, tickets, and it's you got to have technicians that want to do it, right? Or find the reward of doing that work in the first place. I think that's a big part of making a successful enterprise.
Scott Levy, what say you?
Yeah, echoing this idea of the importance of having fun and feeling some sense of fulfillment. There's another related book called The Progress Principle, where they did a ton of research into people's inner work lives at work. And they found that this process of just reflecting each day on like what you accomplished, what was challenging and everything else created incredible job satisfaction. Like people were more resilient, creative, all these things. But in a way, like after reading this, to me, it speaks to the fact that when they were doing that research, they were gamifying everyday experience. And we have something in our app that does this, that's the feedback we get a lot of times. Like, oh, I thought that this was just going to be some kind of weird micromanaging thing, but I'm actually enjoying it because I can see the things I'm getting done. So it's like, when people have the ability to build that narrative for themselves in their mind, kind of like Jim was saying, whatever it is, it's not that I stay up until 3 a.m. sipping bourbon. It's like, holy smokes, I beat Spain finally. And so there's ways I think, the idea of like ticket tracking is another one I'm super familiar with, right? So when you like put that stuff on a scoreboard and then find a way to celebrate it at work, it gets more fun. And I think that's kind of the missing piece I've seen in a lot of work environments. Like, yeah, we know we have to keep the trains running on time, but what if we enjoyed it a little more?
Yeah, how about that?
Or like the places where I've been at places where like we would hit a gong when a new deal came through, no matter how small, and everybody's getting the props. Just little things like that remind us it's fun what we're doing. We don't have to be here. Like we could all quit and go into a hovel and maybe all we do is play Civilization. But like keeping it fun has a huge impact on how we think about what we're doing, and that sense of accomplishment is so huge for people at work.
So Marvin, any of that make you think like, how can I make work feel more voluntary?
Well, of course, yes. But I still come at it from a different perspective. So I didn't grow up playing any games. The last game I played was probably Galaga in a bar alley game room.
Let's go.
But I took the voluntary aspect. So I understood what came across for me was the fact that voluntary participation is where everybody is on board, willingly accepts the goal, the rules, the feedback, all of that stuff. And it reminds me of what I've tried to bring into my business in my life, but it's all based on what I did growing up with sports and student government, where we worked as a team. Everybody understood the rules. Everybody understood what the end, result was. And everybody chose to be on board. And if not, you either quit the team, you quit student government, but you didn't necessarily quit the game midstream or something like that. And it kind of goes back to the podcast that you and I recorded, which will be released probably next week. So guys, be looking for that, where we talked about the core values of a business. Does everybody know what the core values are? And does everybody agree? And if not, that's how you have to rebuild.
That's where you're going to have the clash, because it doesn't feel voluntary if empathy isn't your thing and you're being told to be empathetic. I don't want to be doing this now. That's a terrible one, because I feel like we should all be more empathetic, but you get the idea on that. Yeah.
I have a question about that for Marvin, though. So do you think, though, in your mind, I mean, reality being broken, like do you separate those games from the sports you played growing up? Because for me, they're kind of the same. They were always the same thrill, just different,
Well,
physically different parts.
I do, in the sense that a lot of games I see the game, and now listen, I have to admit, I don't play games. My nephew, 21 years, he's all about games, and he and I try to figure stuff out, but I can't sit down and play these games.
But you're talking about video games, right? You're not talking about like outside games, like my wife's into puzzles. That's a game.
Well, I know, but I'm talking about, yeah, the Halo and the first shooters, and that's what he's into and stuff. But the broader game of, the broader spectrum of gamification, I do get, yeah, with puzzles, any game. I think the one thing that stands out for me is I'm always looking at it from a team perspective versus a solo perspective. Who mentioned the golf earlier? Was it you?
Yeah, Scott. Yeah.
Where, I like golf. I've played golf. And if you look at golf in that perspective, it gives you that instant gratification, that instant failure. You can adjust.
Feedback, yeah.
The only difference is you can't hit F2 and start over.
Correct. No spawn point in golf.
Right. You might hit a mulligan, to do a tee shot. But that's where I see the disconnect. And that's just for me. That's just my perspective. I see a lot of people just quitting and starting over, or wanting to go do something else without getting through that struggle of hitting that perfect tee shot to get it on the green and get that par and stuff like that. That's the difference. I know it's out there. I'm not trying to say that that's, 100% the way I see it. I know it's out there. That's just my struggle with seeing the perspective of, if you can just simply reboot the game and start over, that doesn't always translate to
the real world.
Yeah.
So on page 23, there was a quote that I wrote down that is, freedom to work in the most logical and efficient way is the opposite of gameplay.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, MSPs, let's repeat that one more time. Freedom to work in the most logical and efficient way is the opposite of gameplay. So like, your entire business is designed to streamline, process, automate in the most logical and efficient way. Well, yeah, that's not going to feel like a game. Can you make it a game to put those systems in place, right? So the systems are logical and efficient, but it feels more like a game to get there.
It's deep. I think it might be E-Myth Revisited. I think Michael Gerber talks about this, right? So he says like, I can't really put my finger on it. So pause me. Let me come back to this thought. Let me recreate this.
Okay. All right, anybody else struggle with that? I mean, I think that is true. And it's funny because in golf, to your point, Marvin, is like, your goal is to be as efficient as possible. That is the purpose of golf. And the way she described golf, for the record, cracked me the heck up, right? Like, if that was your goal, it would be to just
throw it in.
ball in the hole.
Yeah.
You just walk in and put it in the hole, but it's not fun that way. Jim, it looks like
I remembered it. Yes. All right. So it's the role of the craftsman, right? So, and I think Robert Greene talks about this a little bit too in the Power of Walls or something like that. But like, if you're an apprentice, right? So you kind of have this, if you're working on a production line, right? Everything's manufactured and you're going through everything, right? But if you're an apprentice, or you're an electrician or a craftsman, or in my case, let's say service technician, right? You're prescribed a certain series of steps and troubleshooting that comes. But there becomes an art form as you evolve, right? Where you can sort of look at these problems and you can automatically diagnose internally and skip 4 steps down a level because of your experience following these processes and procedures. You know what I mean? And I think that's where the role of gamification comes into play, right? So I think, Marvin, to your point, I think a lot of younger generation struggles with this idea of having to do the same thing over and over again, or systematically close stuff. But I think when you can create enough guidelines to propel them in the right direction, but give people the flexibility and the autonomy to solve the problems in their own way, I think that's when you get the best results from what this whole process, right? The gamification process of day-to-day work.
So while you're on that, it's page 27 that I'm going to quote this from. That she talked about the difference between gaming the system and playing the game. Now, she talked about it as there's a lot of negative language around gaming the system. So sometimes like, oh, you're just playing around, this isn't a game, is a negative thing, whereas playing the game is a positive thing. So I think that's interesting when you're talking, like, I think, Jim, your point is like you have to get and you become the expert sometimes by doing the same thing repeatedly in order to be able to see the bigger picture, right? To take the leap type thing.
Right.
And wanting to circumvent that before you get the expertise out of it would be gaming the system and not productive versus playing the game in order to make that leap. I don't know. That's
leveling up, right? Hit the next level. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's the type of where what was it, the four stakes, where, everybody wants to do the high stake stuff, but nobody wants to do the busy work.
Right.
Yep.
Scott Johnson, so you're not from the MSP space, right? So do you have a different context when you hear like the gaming the system versus playing the game?
I go back to sports growing up and just competition in general. And I thought it was interesting how she kind of broke that out. And it made me think. I thought I just liked sports because I was really competitive. I played baseball through high school. But I think there's something else around, it's that engagement. So it brings me down that path of the bar of what engaging experience looks like today is very different. And I think it was fascinating looking back on this. Oh, it was over a decade ago, and like this is the beginning of mobile, before social media took off. And I think just that notion of what does an engaging experience look like today, and like, are there ways to make the work that we're doing more engaging?
Are there I'm curious if anybody has games they play with themselves to make their own work more engaging. I definitely have some things. Like, do you have anything? Yes, Scott Levy?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. So I've got a friend that gamified business development. He's one of our customers.
That's why you said you got a point for that call when we were talking earlier.
Yeah, I get 3 points for this one. I get 3 points for this one.
Like,
so my buddy, like, you guys I'll give him a plug. Hey, John, Connect Points, the Connect Points, I think, is the website. So he, early on, I did like an interview with him. He talks about it. Early on in his career, he was transitioning from consulting to sales. And he and his buddy were brainstorming, like, how do we get things set up so that we're the guys closing deals? Because I don't think they were doing very well. And they started gamifying it. They started giving themselves points, and every week they'd see like who won between them. And that person would win, like, I don't know, whatever, a beer or whatever they did. But when he started his own consulting company, they went from zero. Like, I literally like had lunch with him one day, and like we're going to start a new company. And like Monday they had a new client. That company was like 30 million in no time. It's more than 100 million today. And then he's taught this system to everybody there. 3 of those guys left the company and went and built their own businesses to 10 million, another guy to 100 million, like just using the system of, let me take this idea of, I got to reach out to people and I need to be out there. And instead of it just feeling like an empty, sales is kind of like, sales is a low percentage job.
Yeah.
You're very rarely going to make more than 20%. Maybe you'll make 3 out of 10. So you're failing most of the time, unless you find a way to think of it as a long game and give yourself points. And growing up, like, and doing so many different sports and things with immediate feedback, for me, that was always like, did I close a sale today? Did I close a sale today? Versus what John's system gets you to do is think about like these different categories you get points in.
Activities to get you.
Yeah, so you have these buckets, and I know that if I'm doing enough activities in these buckets, that converges to sales. And his moniker is like, he trains introverts to become killer salespeople, but it's so effective. And I focus on that instead of, some other aspects. I do the same thing when I'm cycling, right? I found certain numbers, if I focus on, I can play games with myself.
Yeah.
get better. And so like finding ways to do that in business. The other thing we do is like we have in our app, it's like a end of day kind of stand up, like here's what got done, here's what's next, here's
Yep.
what's blocked. And so you can start to build metrics and look at, who's doing that. And you get that sense of, okay, I got some things done. Maybe they got the outcomes I wanted, maybe they didn't, but I'm starting to build that story. So it's not just
Awesome.
feeling like I'm spinning my wheels.
It's interesting. I'm mentoring a college student, and I asked him what the big thing was he needed, and he needs an internship for consulting by next summer. And I said, tell me the difference about this project versus your schoolwork that you're doing and doing well at. And he said, well, the schoolwork is very like, here's my list of things I must accomplish today. I do them, I check them off. And then there's this more nebulous, like, these are the things I should do to get an internship. And I said, well, I'm sure you're now seeing, now that I've asked you to describe that we're going to have to make this into more of the gamified checklist and give yourself some points basically for, he's like, yeah, I do actually need to do that. Marvin, I feel like we talked about sales and like the on the podcast of what MSPs need. And so I find Scott's statement interesting about the gamifying of the activities to make the repeated failure is going to happen. So how can we make that okay?
Right. But we talked about it from the standpoint of how to not come across as the used car salesman.
Correct. Yes.
But MSPs, obviously, most of us came out of the technical side, and getting into the sales side is always difficult. So finding ways to make that easier by associating it with, a game or something that we can just, check off and, hey, I need to make 10 calls today, and the game is to get one person to say yes. You can do those sort of things and not make it salesy if you turn it into the right game.
Yeah, the right game. That's always the key.
Yeah, just for clarity, like in my point system, it's not about sales. It's just like making a contact. That's what's fun about it. Like if I talk with a colleague I haven't talked to, I get a point.
Look at how happy he is about that point.
Yeah, but it makes it fun, like, because otherwise you like, and that's what ends up happening. It like you enjoy building your network, and the neat thing about it is all that activity, all that getting out there, ultimately the deals start, people are like, hey, there's opportunity. Like, Marnie and I have had this happen. I was thinking about you today because I talked to somebody that had X going on. Anyways, I just wanted to make sure it's not like I'm like, hey, how you doing? Want to buy from me?
Like,
nope. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I got apparently a point this morning. So Chris Dix, you commented on the fact that you're working in the product to reduce the mundane to automation and AI, right? So that people can do the people work. Page 242, she specifically called out HIT, which is a human intelligence task. And I often speak about Adam Grant's notion of the character revolution, and it's going to be your soft skills, your character skills that help your company stand out and help you stand out as a human. So is that what you feel like that's what inspired you to do your work, to help folks get rid of the mundane? And
yeah, I think, I mean, the act of even being like a tier one, tech is solving a problem for someone is rewarding mentally. Like you get those endorphins, and then you get the bonuses.
Password resets are not.
No, they are not. And so if we can do things like that, and also time entries are not. Like, solving the problem is good.
Yeah, Jim mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. Remembering to put in your time entry for it is important to the business, but not fun. And so if that happens automatically for you, as and then the job becomes better. It becomes a more human, rewarding job and less of a robotic task. And so anytime we can take anything like that out of somebody's job, whatever the job is, and just let them be as creative as the role allows, then that's just a more satisfying,
operating more for their core value, right? If they are a helper by nature, a go-giver by nature, they want to be solving the problem. And absolutely. I 100% feel like it's a confessional where I have to say, I've absolutely said in work, do you want me to do the work or document that I've done the work? Like, how much time should I be spending doing this?
that's not, it's not rewarding for people to have to do that. And so if there is an opportunity to take that away and give people, and it just makes people more productive, it just gives them the opportunity to solve more problems in a day if they aren't spending their time doing those sort of things. And then everybody wins. So.
Yeah. So I am sad because I have an entire index card and I've gone to like 4 pieces of it. But I want to give everyone a chance to give something meaningful in leaving, instead of like, oh, hey, I'm Scott and I gotta go. So I'm going to ask folks to kind of give a wrap-up statement of, I would love to hear you pitch why someone should or should not read this book. Like, is there some idea of you should check out the notion of the Leveling Up +1 Me app, or some takeaway for you from reading this book? I'll just leave it at that. Scott Johnson, what do you think? Should folks read this book?
Yeah, they should definitely read it. I think anyone who's looking to get more out of their employees or create more engaging experiences with their customers, I think there's a number of different ideas and examples that got me thinking on how could you take inspiration from this and apply something to your business or your life. And then the other big point was, like, games are really anti-escapist. Like, I originally thought of games as like, oh, it's a way to escape from the world and you're going down your own little rabbit hole. But it was a way, it's a way to get people more engaged with their activities, with their work, with the world around them. So it gave me a lot of inspiration there as well.
Yeah, so many good ideas. Chris?
Oops, on mute. Yeah, I think that I definitely think people should read it. I'm going to recommend it to my kids and to everybody I know. But I think one of the big reasons why is I felt like the kind of the overriding theme of the book was hope. Like that, in a lot of different ways, about the world, about the fact that it's not a waste of people's time to be doing these things. That it's just people seeking out the things we need and filling these gaps, but overall the book was much more hopeful than I expected it to be, and so I feel like everybody could benefit for that reason.
Agreed. I'm going to try to talk my parents into reading it so they understand my son a little better. Yeah, Marvin.
So yeah, I think it should be read. I think it should be read from the mindset of understanding that games are fun. I mean, most everybody likes a game. Finding the right game is probably key, but at the same time, the core focus of games, help us to work together with, I mentioned earlier, defined goals, rules that everybody agrees upon. But we didn't get to talk much about the collaboration, but the building that stronger social connection, it's being built in the game world. We need to figure out how to translate that
into the real world.
To the real world.
Yeah. And some of her examples around the collaboration, I think, are impressive. I mean, really interesting. I mentioned this when I pitched the book last time. I have some older neighbors who take walks regularly, and they sort of laugh at me to figure out whether I'm going to be knitting, writing, or reading while I'm walking. And so she always asks what I'm reading. And I told her, and she said she was looking for her book club for a nonfiction book for them to read. And I said, Reality is Broken. And, when I mentioned gaming, you could see that didn't trigger straight away, but I explained the AED game, of how people identified where all the defibrillators were in the world. And she's like, okay. Like, so we're not just talking about World of Warcraft and Halo. I might be interested in this. There are games, Scrabble's listed in there. Like, there are all kinds of games and ways that it's good for the world. So I appreciate that. Scott Levy, how about you?
I mean, I definitely recommend the book for a lot of different reasons. And kind of alluding to what Marvin was talking about. Like, there's so much we can do if we are able to frame things and collaborate effectively. And it reminded me, the stories about the collaboration in there are insane. Like, things that I had no idea of, because like a lot of, I think everyone's alluded to on the call, I had kind of dismissed video games at this point, but like the things that people are doing to collaborate.
Oh, like the entire
Amazing.
Wikipedia full of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, like they did a warm, like it's fascinating. They're fascinating things, but it also brought me back to all the things I loved about sports or martial arts or music, learning, and how much fun we can have if we're thinking about things in a little more fun context versus time to make the donuts kind of thing. So yeah, I highly recommend the book. I wish I'd have read it a bit earlier.
Jim, I love the proper way of doing IT. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Like,
Thank you. Thanks. So I felt like they could have cut down on the length of this book quite a bit. I feel like a lot of the lessons in the middle of the book were sort of redundant. But I find that with a lot of business books. I don't need a book about making my bed for 30 minutes in the day, but whatever. I think the value that I really got from this book is actually in the title, Reality is Broken. And I think the purpose of this book is she sort of tries to connect the generational disconnect, I think, between people in our generation and the generation that's coming up between us, right?
Yep.
So we're coming from a level where, for us, video games was Atari and then Nintendo, and it sort of evolved and has become more broader. And I think a lot of times as you get older, you lose that love and sort of focus, right? Like that seeing that vision that you did as a kid as you get older. And I think, Marv sort of referenced this earlier. So, you have this younger generation you have a hard time disconnecting with. This is their lives, right? This is the reality that they perceive, right? And I think this is a good way to frame that disconnect and the ability to sort of reconnect in a way that makes sense for me as an older employer and the generation coming up behind me.
It, as I think about kids, and like I said, my son gamer, my daughter not a gamer. And when Marvin, you said everybody likes games, everybody likes different kinds of games. So my daughter absolutely did not like any of the games that I liked. She didn't want to play chess. She wouldn't play Sorry. Nobody will play me in cards at the house. No one will play Yahtzee, right? Like any of this. But she would play all these creative games, etc. So this notion of gamification, my daughter did not want to learn to read. She loved to write, but like someone else's ideas were like, I don't want anyone else's thoughts. I just want my own. So I tricked her into sight words by creating a scavenger hunt throughout the house in order to get their afternoon snack. So she had to learn to read by getting Post-it notes that landed all over the place because we stock girls are certainly food motivated. So it is interesting on how gamification really can work in a lot of different worlds. For those listening that think like, let's see, should I read this book? Jane McGonigal, again, the author, did a TED Talk. It's about 20 minutes, and it's a fantastic summary of the big idea of this, and you hear her passion, but you also hear some of the statistics on why it's really important. I obviously love the book. I've read it a couple times already. It's highlighted. We're using it as we look toward the next thing that we're working on. So I put it on the highly recommend list. Before we sign off, so we're taking August off for a meeting because there's some mayhem going on. So we'll be back. But in the meantime, that doesn't mean you don't have homework. So make sure you're following me on LinkedIn, and I'll tell you the follow-up when that happens. So the next book we're reading is The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and How It Matters by Priya Parker. It's very interesting because within the first 5 pages, it's going to call you out right away on your weekly meetings. And so it is not just the art of gathering as in having a party. It is also about like, what are you doing in the meetings? What are you doing when you're networking? What are you doing at conferences? And what are you doing at weddings and funerals, etc.? And I'm not that far into it, but I think it's really relevant to this space. And I read it in the first 10 pages. So look forward to catching up with you all then. Thanks so much for joining.